So welcome to Tea and Stuff. I'm here with Ian from Unomi. So the way I describe you best to people is, in all seriousness, of all the people I know in the world of tea and I've grown to know in all their different areas of specialty, you are the biggest advocate for Japanese tea that uh, I mean, there's a lot of people that speak very highly and do a lot to promote Japanese tea, but like you throughout all these years in my eyes at least, you're very much at the top for
Oh,
promoting
really?
Japanese tea. Yeah. So,
Mm,
I guess explain it just from your point of view a little bit about Unami, um, and why you do it.
okay. Well, let's start with the pronunciation. It's you know me, and that is a play on, it's a play on words. Um, you know me is both the cup, there's two types of cups that you use in Japanese tea. One is a wide rimmed cup that's called a sencha, or it's a sencha cup basically.
Hmm.
Essentia one. And then in the winter time, you want a tall, skinny cup with a smaller rim so that you can keep the heat in better. And that's called a Yunomi. And yu is the word for hot water, and nomi is nomu. It's the word for drink. So it's to drink hot water, but basically to drink tea. And so the cup is called Yunomi, and the activity of drinking is called drinking tea is called Yunomi. And so, I was looking for a word for the new brand. And I also, I started the business because I wanted to help Japanese tea farms. Um, and I wanted people to know that the people, not just sell good tea, but for people to know that there are people behind the tea. Um, and that's the main reason why I got into the business, and that's why I named it You Know Me, because it works, and we want consumers around the world to know the people who are, making the teas. Um, and so I actually did not get started in this tea business because I like tea, which is probably very rare.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, yeah. I'm perfectly comfortable with admitting it, and many people are not. But I like tea. I love tea. I've learned a lot about tea, and I've learned to love it. Um, I kind of grew up with it, being Chinese. I'm Chinese. I have a Chinese background. Born and raised in Hawaii, but my mother was Taiwanese, and so we drank a lot of. Actually, my mother did not drink a lot of tea. She drank a lot
Really?
of various types of concoctions, but not a lot of tea at home because she didn't like the caffeine.
Uh,
But we would go to Chinese restaurants, and it was very comfortable, like drinking the oolong tea at the Chinese restaurant. So I was familiar with it to a certain extent, and after coming to Japan, and living in Japan for I've been in Japan for like 20 something years now. And so, yeah, it's been a long time. And so the I've learned a lot about tea, and then I learned about tea from an industry perspective. And it was just it was a fascinating, thing to learn about. Um, and so when I started learning about tea and learning, meeting the people in the industry, I really felt like I could do something to help make a difference in the industry. And so that's why I got into the business. And so it's a very so I think that it matches what I wanted to do and what I felt that the tea enthusiast world around the world really had no good access to Japanese teas when we first started. Okay, this was like 12 years ago. So that's basically the story, I think.
I mean, when
Yeah.
I found you at the very beginning of my journey of really getting into quality tea. like I'd been drinking tea and I'd had oolong and but like I didn't really get into like really the higher end leaves myself. And so when I started to, and I was just probably just on Instagram or the internet, was just searching, loose leaf tea and stuff like that. Yours is one of the ones that came up, and even, and this was probably at least 8 years ago.
2000, 2004, 2005. Yeah, that's about when we started like really pushing it.
And I just remember, and then I remember following up, and maybe a year or so later, talking with you more about stuff. And I probably had very introductory questions about a Japanese tea or something, and you were the first person to be like, "Oh, well, there could be this cultivar, this cultivar, this cultivar, this cultivar, this cultivar. If it's from this area, it can taste more like this. This farmer's has this special touch," and it was just like you hear about that kind of with China, but you see China's this huge, huge country, so you're like, oh, all that variation makes sense. You see, how small Japan is, and you're like, oh, they probably have some variety, but the variety that's available from Japan is at a beginner's glance, it's very overwhelming. So to
Right, right.
have somebody like you who's been in this mission for so many years now, I mean, even though you said you didn't necessarily know a whole lot about tea in the beginning, I mean, now you're 12 years in.
Yeah, and I have a very interesting perspective on the tea industry because of what I'm doing. I mean, we have maybe 100 something tea producers on in the network basically, and I talk to them very frequently, and that it gives me kind of a very wide perspective of what's going on in
Yeah.
all parts of Japan and at all levels of the industry. So in some cases, um, it's interesting because you hear somebody talking in one region about how, and only this thing is done in this region, but actually it's done in the other regions too, and they just don't know about it. Um, or they're trying to promote their own region and over the other regions. They're competing with each other. So it's the wide perspective has really been eye opening, I think. Um, but I also like, especially when I first started, 2010, 2011, when I started out by helping Kyoto Obubu tea farms.
Oh,
And they're the ones who brought me into the industry, basically. Um, I was helping them out, and then they introduced me to other farms who wanted me to help them out, and then we kind of consolidated everybody into Yunomi. The main point is that like there's a lot of there. Oh yeah, there was a lot of misinformation out in 2010. There was just a lot of misinformation. Like you could hear about people would say things like, which isn't so bad, and you can understand how they made that mistake. But they would say things like matcha is made from gyokuro, because matcha is made from shaded tea and gyokuro is shaded tea, therefore matcha is made from gyokuro. And people get bits of information from their suppliers, and they kind of draw their own conclusions about things. And that's on the good side. On the bad side, people make up stories.
yeah. There's
They don't know where Genmaicha came from, so they just invented their own story, which is it's kind of sad in a way.
no. I can
Um,
see how
yeah,
that's not a viewed as a good thing. I get that.
I mean, like I guess it sells tea pretty well if you got like a great story, but it is culturally inappropriate. I guess you would say like cultural appropriation is. I
And
guess that's the
they
term.
all do have their own stories, so it's like, why don't you at least use the story to tell the story and then tell an interesting fact about the tea or your
Yeah.
experience with it, as opposed to
Do you know
making
the
something up?
Genmaicha story? I
Mm-mm.
think this originated in England. I'm not sure, but the earliest instance of this story being published I could find that was in somewhere in UK. But they somebody had written, some marketer had written that Genmaicha was made, was created in the samurai period when a samurai lord, when he was drinking his tea, his servant dropped some rice into his tea. So the samurai lord immediately chopped off his head. But then he drank his tea and then discovered that the tea was taste pretty good,
Whoop.
and therefore and therefore he named the tea Genmaicha because the servant was named Genmai, which is pretty ridiculous because Genmai means rice. You don't name your. I mean, it's just a ridiculous story. And I
I'm
really hated it because it kind of like portrayed, like Japanese samurai as these warmongering barbarians, and which is like the farthest thing from the truth. Um, and so like that was my first like, okay, mission. Okay, let's stamp out this like myth. And then Genmaicha, like the real story of Genmaicha is that and it's not even that old either. It's like a fairly in the 1,000-year history of tea. It's a fairly new tea.
Mhm.
It was invented. It was commercialized, I could say, around the turn of the 20th century. And people, the Japanese have a custom of eating these. They would toast these hard Japanese rice cakes at New Year's, and the toasting of that created a very a toasty flavor to it. You would toast it like over your charcoal fire, for example, and then it would get hard as it cools. And so they would put that into their tea because before refrigeration, tea would get stale. Um, so they would put it into their tea, and the tea would taste better. And so when that was commercialized, they started just toasting rice grains and using rice grains for that. And so that's the real story about how Genmaicha was invented. And it's not a. I can imagine. I can see how it's not a. I wouldn't say the samurai lord chopping off his servant's head is romantic, but
Is there any?
it's a little bit different.
Is there any even like folklore truth to that? Like origin to that, not original story, but
No,
the no. It's like it's
no,
complete fabrication.
complete fabrication. Yeah,
And
complete
that's like you
fabrication.
said. It's hard because you when you're really trying to you're trying so hard to be respectful of the source and the source material that when you see stuff like that, like some people say, "Oh, it's okay because it's helping sell tea, and the more people are drinking tea, then." But it's like,
Yeah,
but especially in this day and age where we really are trying to like be more honest about where things come from and the history of it, it's
exactly
like
right.
we
Exactly.
should just start leaning towards those better options of how to introduce a tea. And if it's sort of like, why do you need a folklore story for it?
Right.
Like, I get
Exactly.
that it helps sell, but especially if you fabricated it, then if that were just me, I'm just trying to, I would be terrified that right after I told the story, someone would be like, no, no, that didn't happen. You know what I mean? And then because then
Exactly.
you'd have to back up what you said, and then it's like you're fighting for something that you just like pulled out to sell a couple extra bags of
Yeah.
tea. So was it
Right.
worth it for you? Not really, and it didn't serve you, and it definitely didn't serve the source origin of the tea and the traditions around it. That it's like then you really haven't done a service to anybody.
You haven't done a service to anybody. Yeah. And then like the whole mission of this this effort, this project, is to be very transparent, right? Is to like cut through all of the, I guess, the marketing gimmick, and like present the tea and the people as it truly, like there's beauty in it, and there's wonder in it, there's deliciousness in it, and if you can cut through all the marketing crap, then you can really get to know it, right? And you can, it should be as beautiful as it is on its own. um
Right.
And it is, incredibly beautiful. Like, all of these, the places are beautiful. The tea leaves are beautiful. The taste of it is beautiful. Um, and now, so when you talk about people talk about crappy tea, actually, I don't believe that there's like as a I guess you would say like I'm a tea merchant rather than a tea connoisseur. So I don't believe that there's actually any crappy tea. I only believe that there's overpriced tea. So if you price a low quality tea at the right price, it's okay. It's just when
Hmm.
you just take it, if you take it out of that and you overprice it, that's when it gets like, the expectations that you have for that price is just completely
Yep.
unfulfilled, right? So, and it's interesting to see some very, um, I guess you would say, low priced tea. It's nice to sell low priced tea that is interesting.
Right. Right.
Because there are some low priced teas that are actually very, very interesting. I mean, they're low priced because it's easy to make. It's maybe, for example, leaves that they were going to throw away or use as compost anyway, but you process it in a certain way, and you do certain things to it. There's one tea that I don't have on Yunomi that I've been meaning to add for the longest time, but there are efforts in Japan by farms throughout Japan to um, reclaim abandoned tea fields. So,
Ooh.
so these tea fields, and there's a lot of abandoned tea fields. It only takes like a couple of years for a tea plant to grow beyond. Like, tea plants usually are
The
around a
pruning.
meter tall,
Right.
right? Well, like 50 centimeters to a meter tall, and that height, it allows the farm to be efficient. But then the tea plants, when they grow to like over a couple of years to like 2 meters tall, then there's no way for the farmer to be efficient in harvesting a crop. And Japanese leaves are prized mainly because they're harvested when they're mostly very young. And so when you reclaim a field, you're basically cutting the entire field from 2 meters down to like maybe 20 centimeters. And all of that plant material that is like all of that plant material is mostly just thrown away by most places. But there are some farmers who, what they do is they'll get machines and they'll chop it up, and it becomes like wood chips. But you can steep the wood chips, and they're actually pretty interesting. Um, it's nice to have. It's very earthy, so it's one thing that I haven't gotten my hands on, like
I like that.
commercially.
I like that point though. Like it's a really solid point that you know that's what I think a lot of like specialty tea vendors will say this in another way in another context is they'll be like, you can carry some of the most expensive tea in the world, but it has to be worthy of that price. It has to
Hmm. Hmm.
be that good to where the enjoyability of that drink is worth that dollar amount to you.
Yeah,
That's on the high
yeah,
end of that. On the other end of that, it's you're correct for the right price, as long as it's not like crazy pesticide laden something that's bad for
that
you.
that's that that
Right,
there's
right.
a point there. Yeah, you have
You
a
just
point
throw
there.
that out. But yeah, no, I get it. Is that
Yeah.
and you talk about I think in Japan there's a lot of really amazing affordable teas. This is our Kisen Sencha. Uh, very, very affordable. One of the more affordable teas I have, but it's not weak. It's not. It doesn't taste cheap. It doesn't give away its flavor too quickly. It's just a great, great tea, and it's the price is just phenomenal because it reinstates that fact. It shows you that not all good tea will cost you your whole paycheck.
Right, right, right. And And there are lots of really great teas. Oh, one of my go-to teas is I think we sell it for like $15 for 200 grams or so. Um,
Ooh.
but you know, it's a kukicha from Kagoshima. And but the way that it's like the original leaf it's kukicha, you know, so it's the stems that are filtered out of during refinement. So you know the company is taking, it's not a huge processing company, so what they do is they take all of their kukicha from all of the batches that they're refining and putting it together. So you're actually getting like good kukicha from like their really good stuff, as well as some lower grade kukicha being blended together. And so it's a pretty good blend. And then you know they toast it afterwards to give it a very toasty flavor, and it's not like super complex, but it's just like satisfying.
But
And it's
I bet that would be more complex than a lot of single season cookie cha though. Because like you said, you've got the high stuff, you've got the low stuff, and they all have slightly different characteristics. When you
I think that if you did a chemical analysis of it, it would become the chemical analysis would be very complex. But in your mouth, everything just blends together. So I don't know. It depends on, I guess maybe it depends on how sophisticated your palate is, and
Mhm.
how much you're able to really like identify specific flavors out of it. I'm actually really bad at it. Like that's why I don't call myself a tea connoisseur. I taste a lot of teas, and you know, a lot of them, um, they you can taste something in it, but I'm really bad at like identifying those tastes and things like that. I can tell it tastes good. You know, these
Yeah.
taste good. These taste bad. These are complex. These are very simple. But I'll leave it to you know the real connoisseurs, the customers, you know that we have to really identify exactly what's going on. I'm just here to provide access for all of you guys.
I
Provide you
haven't
with you know.
This is a interesting question for you. This
Mhm.
came up in one of my live sessions, and people were. I'll see what you say about it, though. Okay, so I was at a tea room recently, and I had a really interesting brew. It was basically Taiwanese cookie cha.
Taiwanese
So,
cookie show.
so it was this is stems that were roasted, or hoji cha. I'm sorry, because it was roasted. And then they roasted the stems, and
Mm-hmm.
that was the tea. It was delicious. Blah blah blah. It doesn't that part of it doesn't really matter. Would it be incorrect to call that hoji cha? Now, obviously, you'd want to say like Taiwanese before it or after it or something. But if that vendor were to name that Taiwanese hoji cha, where does that sit? How is that
So
okay? Would that be
so I would say that I think some people would say that no, it's not. Either because it's not Japanese or because it's well, one question is, you know, what was the base leaf? Was it green tea or oolong tea? And I think that um, there is a not a definition per se. Like the only real definition of hojicha is roasted tea. So anything that is roasted tea. Any tea leaf or any part of the tea leaf that is roasted becomes roasted tea. Um, on one hand, that's the only real definition. On the other hand, it's the understanding of the market. You know, it's understanding of most consumers that hojicha would mean roasted green tea from Japan. So whether if you put a qualifier on it, so in order to do something, you have to put a qualifier on it. It's not Japanese, it's Taiwanese. So Taiwanese hojicha. If it's not green tea, it's oolong. If it's from made from oolong, then it's oolong, Taiwanese oolong hojicha. So you need to put qualifiers on it, and that's all that's really necessary, I think. So if it's made from the leaf, then most hojicha is made from the leaf. Therefore, it's just Taiwanese oolong hojicha. But if it's made from the stems, maybe you want to put like Taiwanese oolong stem hojicha. The more qualifiers you put on it, the longer the name is,
Yeah.
which is great for internet sellers. It's great because you can put a long name on it, and it's good for SEO. It's easier for them to find it. But for like naming purposes as a product, it's kind of like, well, how long you're going to get the name, And Japanese tea is a lot like that.
They actually called it, I think, Wooden Dragon, which I thought was actually, considering it was probably using oolong stems. I don't know that. I mean, that's not the exact name, I'm sure, but I read that name that they gave it, and I sort of was like, that's
I think the Chinese are much better at naming the teas, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I mean, they're much better at naming the teas. Like, I think the Japanese are very, very, what's the word? They're not poetic enough. They're poetic enough with their own product names. But the industry is like, okay, well, this is made from this or in this way, therefore let's call it, this. Like, and that's not like always the case. Like Gyokuro has a very poetic name, but like Kama Iri-cha is basically, Kama is pan, Iri is fire, so it's pan fire tea. If you understood Japanese, it would be super straightforward. Everything would be super straightforward because that's what it is.
Ordering the tea would not be hard. You just read the name and you go.
Do I want it, or do I want fukamushi-cha, or do I want kamairi-cha? Do you want it? Fukamushi is literally deep steamed, and kamairi is literally pan fired. So, and then the hard part is because people we like to keep the original Japanese names, and then customers don't understand Japanese. But the other thing that's hard, even for Japanese people to understand, is that, so even though it's kamairi-cha, it could be pan fire tea. Like, it could be oolong pan fire tea. It could be green pan fire tea, green tea that's been pan fired. It could be a whole number of things that are different, and all of those qualifiers get ignored in favor of what's recognizable, and so that makes it a little bit hard. One great example is, you've heard of Kabuse-cha and Gyokuro.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, Kabuse-cha being a tea that has been lightly shaded, and Gyokuro being a tea that is more heavily shaded. When I started, very few people were calling their teas Kabuse-cha. Kabuse-cha was like an industry term that people used, and they would call Kabuse-cha products netto gyokuro, like hot water gyokuro, because the market at that time did not understand the term Kabuse-cha, or did not recognize the term Kabuse-cha. And so the term that they recognized was gyokuro, so you want to use gyokuro and then a qualifier. So that's what. But then I think it was the farmers in Mie Prefecture. That's a little bit east of Kyoto. I think they were the ones who made a real push to put Kabuse-cha on the map, and make it more recognizable as a tea. Maybe, don't quote me on that. So now Kabuse-cha is more recognizable as a product, and so you have Kabuse-cha as the lightly shaded, and then Gyokuro as the heavily shaded, more stronger umami flavor. But then what a lot of people don't know is that a lot of sencha is also flavored, not flavored, but shaded. Mm-hmm. So you shade Kabuse-cha for 2 weeks or so, and that gives you a certain amount of umami. You shade Gyokuro for 3 or 4 weeks, it gives you much more umami. You shade leaves for 3 days. You don't call it kabusecha, but it's shaded and it gives the leaf a little bit more umami, sweet flavors. And it does make it a little bit more premium of a sencha. But you almost never try to. There's no name for it besides sencha, right? So if you say that all sencha is unshaded, then that would be incorrect because you do shade it a little bit, like 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, 8 days, 9 days. Whatever the intention of the farmer is to create a leaf. And so how does the farmer decide? I guess everybody has their own like strategy, but they are creating a product. So if they can create a more valuable product, then that could be more money. But if they can get more volume with larger leaf, and so if they allow it to be exposed to sunlight more, it'll grow faster and larger. Then if the more volume might result in higher revenue for the farmer. So the farmers also have to think about their own like production strategy, I guess you could say. And that's a huge part about farming, and a huge part of the complexity, and some you could also say like the art of manufacturing tea in that way, or crafting tea in that way. So actually, I get a lot of questions from farmers about how should I make the tea, because in the end they need to, there's some teas that they'll make because they want to make it, and then in the end they need to make what the market will buy.
Yeah.
And so they're like, what does the overseas market want? And so so they often ask me, what does the overseas market want? I try not to tell them anything because I'm not really, we're not operating at the scale where we can say, oh, that's what the market wants, therefore we'll buy all 700 kilograms that you're going to make. No, we can't.
Right, and you don't want to say that and have it not pan out, and then the poor producer's like, hey, I trusted you, and it's like,
there are lots of stories of that happening though.
Really?
Yeah. So for example, have you heard of the cultivar called Benifuki?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. So the whole thing about Benifuki is that it has a very, very high concentration of this certain type of catechin, methylcatechin, and that methylcatechin has like many studies have shown that it provides some form of relief for people who have hay fever, and not immediate one, like it's not like a medicine where it cures it, but over the course of like maybe I can't remember what it is, but before hay fever season starts, if you drank Benifuki green tea every day for 6 months before the start of hay fever season. So if you basically make it a habit, then your symptoms might be reduced by 20 to 30%, which is not much, but for people who have hay fever, anything helps, and so there are tons of farmers who are pushed to, I wouldn't say pushed, encouraged. They were convinced by like retailers and wholesalers and other people further down in the industry that this would be a product that would sell really well in the domestic market, at least. And it did for a while, but in the end, it's not a cure. And the over the last, I guess, 10, 15 years, like allergy medicines, like actual allergy medicines have gotten so good that people don't really like, it's very bitter.
We have
it's very bitter.
We have it made as a we've had it. We've sold it as Wako Cha. We've sold it in its red black tea form, and then also we get it produced in a white tea form. If you haven't tried it in the white tea form, I would just give it a shot. If you ever have the,
Hmm.
I love it as a white tea, but I know from having it as the Wako Cha that it can be. I used to have to warn customers. I'd say, listen, it's got a bite. It's got a bite. It's a good tea, but it's got a bite. And I can understand how if that, I haven't had it in the green tea form, but I'd
It's
have to
very
imagine.
bitter. It's
And
like
then, yeah,
it's
that'd
like
be a
taking your
tough,
sencha there and steeping it at 100 degree, like boiling water for 5 minutes.
and,
It's
and
bitter.
that's maybe like, I get where they were going with it, that yes, it's got these properties that
Right.
are helpful for your health, but when the product is difficult to
Yeah.
consume and enjoy, then it's like,
Right.
you really shouldn't put. I don't get where they got the idea to really exponentially push the product like that.
So a lot of farm like you it takes 5 years to get a tea field up, grown large enough so that it can be commercialized, right? So Fuki's been around for a number of decades, but a lot of farmers have decided to give up on it and are replacing it with other cultivars now. And so this is kind of an example where the farms tried it and they were encouraged to try it and it didn't work. It failed as a product. And so like there's all kinds of the reason why Benifuki was being made as a black tea, because black teas, um, leaves that produce more catechin tend to be better as black teas. Um,
Yeah,
so that's why green teas from like green teas from India or Kenya, for example, are not are not seen as good as like Japanese or Chinese green teas, because they tend to be they tend to just be more bitter because they have more catechin. So it's interesting because knowing that, what one manufacturer in Japan did, like a bottled tea manufacturer, is that they bought they bought tea from Kenya, green tea from Kenya, imported it into Japan, and because it was super bitter, they marketed it as like a semi-health product. So a bottled tea drink that was extremely bitter, but very more concentrated than your normal bottled tea drink, and you would just basically chug it down, and like whole like a chug it down like a medicine, right? And
yeah.
so because it was bitter, it was supposed to like help you prevent you from absorbing fat after you eat or something like that. And that was a hit product, actually.
Really?
Real hit product, yeah. They didn't mention that it wasn't from Japan, but in their marketing, they didn't mention wasn't from Japan, but it was a hit product. And it's still around, I think, but it's kind of the fad has kind of died off, I guess.
Has
But
what are some of the other kind of, I don't want to say issues, but what are some of the not problems? That's not even the right word. Like, what are some obstacles ahead of Japanese tea industry right now? Like, is there any stuff that you see possibly coming, and you're trying to be proactive against it, or
mm,
are you just carrying on as you do and trying not to alter it?
well, there's like the biggest problem in the industry, the long term, is that um, the entire economy is shifting away from agriculture, and it has been over the last like 40 years. But it's an urbanizing economy or society, and it's an aging one. So the people who are in their 50s and 60s right now, that was that was the baby boom in Japan, I think. So you have this like demographic hump, and for tea farmers or farmers in general, like there are very few people coming into the agriculture industry, and farmers generally, tea farmers in most situations encourage their children not to get into tea farming,
Yeah, yeah.
because they can earn more money and have a more less hardworking lifestyle, like working a desk job somewhere.
In the tech industry, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in the tech industry. Um, and so there's a problem with succession. The really successful farms, most of them have children who will come back and take over. So you don't really have to worry about those like farms. So the industry is kind of shrinking in that way, and like younger farmers are taking on more fields.
Hmm.
Like they're taking over fields from farmers who are retiring or have passed away, or don't want to farm anymore. So that happens a lot. So there's a lot of consolidation. But it is hard because the well, I guess Kagoshima is one of the culprits, but they're producing great tasting teas at lower prices because they're more efficient. Um, and
Gotcha.
that's so it's hard for the people elsewhere in Japan to compete. Um, and because of that, there's not a lot of more people are getting out of the tea industry than coming in to it.
It's the same. I hear that a lot from a lot of people I talk to in Taiwan too.
Yeah, I think
They're having a lot of the
Taiwan probably
same.
has the same problems. Yeah, which is, I'm not sure that it's a situation that needs to be fixed
You
per
shouldn't be in the.
se.
I don't think. I mean, well, I think you should only be in the tea industry if your heart is it really in the tea industry, or you're doing it strictly as a job and just to get it done. Like I feel like those are the two situations.
Yeah, and like in as the farmers consolidate, like the younger farmers take over for the older farmers, they're usually like leasing the lands from them. Um, but as they do that, and they become like larger scale farms, then they'll hire people, and so you're going to see a shift towards more like American style like farm corporations, which in Japan has been until like the last 10 years or so. I think I can't remember when the law changed. Like there was a law governing land use in Japan that basically prevented agricultural corporations from forming. Um, I guess if you were going to be a agricultural corporation, like 75% of your stockholders needed to be registered farmers or something like that. Um, and that has changed. So I think maybe we'll see more larger scale farming operations in Japan. And on one hand, that kind of sucks for artisanal teas and artisanal products in general.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is kind of necessary considering the demographics, and there will always be. I think there will always be a small number of farmers who are going to produce really great stuff, and even the larger farms too. Like the way that Japan operates is that you don't have like single contiguous fields like you do in the US. They manage their fields in small plots. Even in the larger areas, they're all small plots, and the plots are often interspersed so that like it's a kind of a risk management system. You have, if you have 30 farmers in a single area, you don't want to section them off so that one farmer is here and all of their fields are here and then all of their fields are here, because if, I don't know, like a tornado strikes that farm, then if all his farm fields are concentrated there, then he gets wiped out, right? Tornadoes are very rare. Like like a pesticide, a
Yeah.
pest hits one area, then they're like wiped out. The other thing is that if you stagger the fields in different areas, then the leaves will grow at different rates, and then like a single farmer can harvest all of those fields because the leaves are going to be ready at a different time in the week. For example, during the harvest week or the 1 month of harvest, so he'll be able to stagger his harvests in that way. So, like because of that, like even a large scale farm can still produce artisanal tea in one specific area. So I'm pretty confident that we'll still see a lot of like good teas going forward. But I also think that it's sad because the tea farming is not just like an industry. There's a culture behind it. There's a lifestyle,
Yeah.
a way of life behind it. And without the community, you do kind of lose that. Like the valley where Obubu is based, Wazaka is that valley itself is a small village of 5,000 or so people, and like tea farming is a central part of the economy of that small town. And so there's a culture that grows up around the industry in that town. So like what activities they do and what they pray for at the shrine. Those types of cultural things get lost if it just turns into like corporate activity, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I am sad about. Like, and so that's why I really like try to focus on like smaller scale operations and like give opportunities for those types of outfits to like get a bigger market, access to bigger market. So that's there's that cultural aspect is what I'm trying to preserve, I think.
What do you think? Are there things other people can do to try to support specifically that mission?
So like I guess interestingly enough, like you think primarily, okay, well, we want to support the farmers, so you try to buy direct from farmers. I actually think that, and this is kind of a double-edged sword, but so farmers farm even the smallest farmers farm at a scale where they need to find buyers for all of their tea that they produce. And the wholesalers, the wholesale refiners, are the ones who are buying up all their teas, buying up the crops. And those businesses, if they don't have customers, then they're not going to be able to buy up all of the teas from a farm. So buying direct from the farm, and farmers generally don't have the technical or um, um, knowledge or experience to market and sell their teas directly to consumers themselves, or don't have enough time to do it because they're farming. The supply the distribution chain is necessary in that way. So what you need to demand of retailers and then their suppliers, which are the wholesalers, what consumers should demand of those of that level of the distribution chain is not only just quality tea, but um, well, one thing is to demand that they know which farm it's coming from. Not because they want to get access to the farm directly, but they just want to know. And to have more specificity in the tea that they're getting. So not blend everything all together to make some generic green tea, but if there's more consumer demand for for example, single cultivar teas, then
Ah,
we don't need to go directly to the farms, but more consumer demand for like single cultivar teas or single estate teas or that type of thing is it will force the wholesalers to change their production strategies. So they're not going to blend it all together, but they're going to keep it separate. Um, they will be they're the ones who will be supporting the farms. And
very.
so
That is
it's
a
a little bit hard to understand. It's a little bit, kind of a
no.
sophisticated.
That is a better answer than that is a phenomenal answer. That's a well thought out answer. It
Yeah.
really, I like that's you said it very well too. I mean, that's very. Uh, you're
And
right. I mean, that is
I'm actually seeing it in the market in Japan, actually. So, I mean,
phenomenal.
you do see it in the specialty tea industry outside of Japan, right? Which is, that's great, but like the the biggest market for Japanese, 95% of the market for Japanese tea is Japan, right? So if it's not happening in Japan, it's just a drop in the bucket. Um, but you do see it to a certain extent in Japan, and I think that's helpful. I think it's very helpful for the farmers who are trying to produce at a high level. Um, at the same time, truthfully, the opposite is also happening at the same time. Like on one hand, you do have, okay, so the supermarket is going to sell the Saimidori single cultivar tea. On the other hand, it's being sold under the supermarket's brand. And so then they're controlling it. And so it's Sayamidori, but it's probably a amalgamation of Sayamidori from multiple farms. So it's, yeah, it's a complicated situation, I guess.
Well, I think both. I think it's even more complicated because both styles of tea need to exist. Like you said, that grocery store needs those teas to be blended because that's how they either do consistency or they can do the volume they do. So for that tea to be available in that grocery store, sometimes that's what it has to go by.
Yeah, yeah. But then, the so I mean, basically the shift of the last 15 years has been small scale tea shops to supermarkets and drugstores. Like, 15, 20 years ago, like 40% of the industry or 40% of the industry was small scale tea shops. And now that's been replaced by like 60% being sold through supermarkets and drugstores. I'm actually surprised that online sales have not been don't have a bigger market share in Japan. Um, it's really puzzling to me, actually. But like, because it's supermarkets and drugstores operating at a large scale, they're also contributing to the whole like mass production. Um, Sometimes it's good, that they're doing very specific things, but most of the time it's not. But I do see, on the other hand, I do see like more like mass producers, like large scale producers, putting out products that feature specific farmers, which is interesting, I think. At the same time that they have, this one company that I can think of, they put out a tea that says that they market as very cheap, but like straight from the factory teas. So they're a factory and it's straight from the factory. But it's sold really cheaply at drugstores, like 300 grams of green tea for literally $3.
Wow.
Super cheap, yeah. And at the same time, that same company just featured these two sisters who are taking over for their family's farm. Basically, they just bought up their entire crop and then put their picture, and they featured their teas on two levels of products, and then they were selling those two. So it's, like, you wouldn't see that happening before, and it's pretty interesting. And a lot more often that you see is like groups of farmers being featured, like the tea co-op of this town, for example, and they have like maybe 15 members. So it's a very small but not individual production like cooperative. Then that cooperative is being featured on the teas of a larger scale manufacturer or consolidator. So I think it's interesting that market is kind of moving in that direction. But overall, it's still dominated by Japan, and unfortunately, Japanese are moving away from drinking. At least they're moving away from drinking green tea from the leaf, brewing their own teas. They're actually the younger generations. Basically, anybody under 40 primarily drinks green tea out of a bottle, out of a plastic bottle. They think of green tea like they think of Coca-Cola. Like it's not something that you make; it's something that you drink out of a bottle.
I've seen some of your guys' impressive vending machines and all the varieties.
The variety.
For somebody like us that like I don't get to see a lot of like interesting iced tea varieties. Whenever I see that stuff, like I understand that you don't want to overly encourage that because you want to preserve culture, but at the same time, me looking in from the outside, I'm like, ooh, look at all those interesting varieties of iced tea.
It's pretty decent too. Like,
but yeah, I know
it's pretty decent, but it's pretty decent.
Well, you get why a lot of them drink it, but at the same time, you're like, okay, but let's not forget about
the good stuff.
Tea. Like, yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time. I've had a blast talking with you. I mean, there are multiple things we talked about that I got a lot out of, and I definitely know that when people listen to it, they're gonna light up as well. How do you prefer to be contacted if somebody wants to reach out? Or
the easiest way is to go into the chat box on Yunomi.life and send a message. I handle all the support tickets, and putting it into the support ticket system means that it doesn't get lost in the email box.
Nice.
Or if you want to reach out to me as well as the other tea community, I do have a Japanese tea connoisseurs Facebook group, and it's me there. There are also other vendors there that are interesting to talk to, and other tea connoisseurs and tea enthusiasts who get involved and like really ask some hard questions. I like having good discussions.
Yeah. I'll definitely get a link from you for that, and we'll put that all in the description because if I'm sure that's going to sound good to many people if they're not already in it.
And I'm pretty good about keeping out the spam.
Yeah,
maybe not so.
No,
some people are not so.
You've never been a super hard person to get a hold of.
No.
So, obviously, I wish you health and you and your family and happiness and prosperity. That's another thing I definitely wish for you. I think you should, at the end of the day, if nothing else, you should be proud because you're a man who's on a specific mission, and I think each day I really think you do a lot to.
That means a lot to me.
It's like very transparent to me. I think it's very easy to see in you.
Can I mention that I really like your setup?
Thank you.
Your tea table setup. I'm in my bedroom right now, so I don't have any tea in front of me. But one of the things that I really think that should be adopted more in Japan is this tea table setup. We don't have that in Japan, and I think we should have it more.
It helps set. I say it sets the stage, and not in like a
Yeah,
light
yeah.
camera action. Meaning, when I sit down at this table, this is tea time. My brain,
Mm-hmm.
everything knows I'm in a safe space here. I I have my vessels where I want them, and the certain accessories that I want to be there are there. I get this is very important to me, like this
Mm-hmm.
setup.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a long time to search around, and I can understand how that's something that if I don't see it, it's something I wish people consider. It may not be a detail that's important to everybody, but I think a tea table or just some sort of
Mm-hmm.
ceremonial
Space.
place
Yeah,
is super
that's
important.
important. I think that's important. The I mean, the tea room in the Japanese tea ceremony serves as that, but it's much harder to set up an entire room, especially in very cramped spaces like New York or Tokyo. Um, yeah, so it's good. I'm gonna have to think about that and like figure out maybe there might be something interesting that we can do with that.
Oh, you should. If you have the will, then there's a way.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Okay,
thank you again.
thank you.
I'm sure plenty of people again enjoy this and reach out, and everybody go check out Unami. You
You know
say it
me.
again. You know me. I'm
Yes,
gonna
you know
ingrain
me.
that into myself. You know me. I love it. So cheers. I know you don't have a drink,
Cheers.
but I'll cheers to you, and be well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.